This morning we spent a lot of time on the theory behind CBE, on research, on policy questions, and now, as good educators always have to at some point, we have to take theory into practice. So with us on the stage, we have Paul LeBlanc, who's been given a great introduction by Chairman Desmond. Not somebody who's always talked the talk, but who has walked the walk. I think it can't be emphasized enough. He's referred to as an expert witness, but that would be calling, like George Washington, an expert witness to the American Revolution. I think that we're talking to someone who is an architect and perhaps more so an inventor. One need only look at what's happened with Southern New Hampshire University. He really doesn't need an introduction in New England, because those of you who are facing low enrollment, you can thank Paul. Paul has, I think, is now at over 50,000 students. He is the largest private university in New England. He is the largest provider of online learning in New England. He is the third largest provider of online learning in the United States. And what it says about this is, number one, a very strong plan, a very strong vision, commitment to a new model, affordability, high quality, and pervasive marketing. Paul, I have to tell you, I was in Birmingham, Alabama a couple of months ago, and I did feel at home seeing an ad for Southern New Hampshire University down there. Those of you who are Jeopardy watchers, I am the one person who's been on Jeopardy more than Ken Jennings is Paul LeBlanc. You might see him awarding degree programs, but it's a smart move. Paul is not only a supreme academic, but also a supreme marketer. And rather than being an innovator, he might say he's a disruptor. He was out ahead of the curve. And what I heard a lot of buzz in the lunchroom is, has the train already left for CBE? And I don't think it has. Obviously, there are a number of models that we talked about this morning. And as Pam Tate from Cal mentioned, often with these new enterprises, there is a sequence where we throw out some leaders ahead of the game to get the slings and arrows, Paul. Let you take some of the heat at the front line, and then we have secondary waves of adaptation and adoption, and then the rest of us follow along. I think Paul has read the tea leaves with College for America in developing this model. He was ahead of the curve on online, and he is now, I think, ahead of the curve on CBE. I think when we look at what's happened with competency-based education, there is the confluence of the commitment to assessment, which really began with the Spellings Commission, to perhaps justify traditional education. Paul has turned that on its head, because if we are concerned with what people learn, do we need to be as concerned with how they learn it? So more of a focus on outcomes instead of inputs, the confluence of that plus public policy on the completion agenda, and lastly, the technology that's out there to make this work for people in a more convenient way. So Paul, I think that a few years ago we talked about university without walls. Now we're talking about university without walls and university without time. I guess that makes you a bit of a time traveler. I think that you are somewhere out in the future. So I know those of us that are here this afternoon would like to get a glimpse into that future and hear a lot about College for America. But since you are a witness, we must have the whole truth and nothing but it.
There you go. It's been a breeze, actually. No, can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you. It's an overly kind introduction from both. Charlie, New Hampshire is a small state. Being one of its most influential citizens, a little bit like being one of the best hockey players in Saudi Arabia. It's like the bars. There are only a few 100,000 of us. It's easy. Howard's funny mentioning Jeopardy. My mom passed away at age 96 last spring, and right before I used to go visit her at the home, and she would say, "Honey, I like your ads, but you have to run them so often during Jeopardy." So she I was like, "Mom, they're going to run someone's ads. They might as well be mine." So let me give you a little bit of insight into one approach to competency-based education, because in reality, there are practitioners in the room who could sit here as easily and talk about the way they have managed to move into the space as well. And what's a little bit different about our modestly named College for America is that it is the first direct assessment program. So it represents kind of a next generation of competency-based, but everyone does direct assessment. That's a term of art, really, right? Which is the ability to give federal financial aid untethered to the credit hour. And that has allowed us, I think, to push the model in some new and interesting ways. So let me give you a quick tour. And Howard, and kind of when we talked about this, is to try to keep this to a very small number of slides and then kind of open it up to discussion and questions. So I'll try to do this in a fairly quick manner, but if you want to stop at any point and go, what the heck does that mean? Please tell me. So, oops, sorry. Let's go back. So at the end, and you heard this morning, so I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on it, the credit hour is really good at telling us how long someone sat, not particularly great at telling us what they've learned. Employers talk about this all the time and say, when you look at a transcript, you can infer some things when someone got a B in Intro to Sociology, but you don't know what they can do, as John Ebersole said. What employers want to know is what can someone do? What do they know? What can they do? And they're increasingly, I think, skeptical of what we say about our students as graduates. So you saw the Pew research that said 75% of provosts think that their graduates are ready for the job market, while only 11% of employers. It was interesting that in Aspiring Adults Adrift, the authors there who went back and talked to the students they had studied and who have since graduated reported that about 14% of those students felt themselves ready for the workplace. We can talk about why and how that may feel more or less accurate, but that's the perception out there. And one of the things that resonates so deeply with employers when we present to them is the response to our saying with great clarity, here are the 120 claims we make for our students in the associate's degree. And here's how we know. And we don't use web-based portfolios, I was mentioned this morning, because employers tell us they don't really look at them unless they're in the field of education, which has a long tradition of that. So we can talk about how we sort of capture student work, but we're actually doing it through LinkedIn, which actually our students get on very, very early and has a mechanism for keeping and sharing your best work, and that's proven to be a pretty effective tool. Digression for a moment. So if you think about it, Amy Lightman wrote the definitive piece on the credit hour, the history of the credit hour, called Cracking the Credit Hour. And as she said, it was really designed, as you know, to figure out a way to pay pensions to retired college faculty. What it's done instead has become sort of the Higgs boson particle of our industry, right? It's the dark particle that holds everything together. It's how we unitize knowledge. It's how we think about programs. It's how we measure progress to completion. It's how we allocate faculty workload. It's how we allocate our physical resources, our classrooms, and our schedules. And while we play around the edges of that, it's still at heart the bulk. It does all of that that I've just described. And most importantly, it's the basis for $150 billion of federal financial aid every year. And that's the oxygen that keeps this collective animal alive and breathing. So it's really built into the structure of what we do. It permeates higher ed. It's not very good at some of these things we see on the margins. It's not particularly good at telling us what people have actually learned, as I said. Here's a little exercise next time you're meeting with employers. I do this all the time. Raise your hand if you've hired somebody with a 4-year college degree who doesn't write very well. Right? And you could do that with math or quantitative reasoning, a whole bunch of things. The clincher is always, raise your hand if you have somebody with a college degree you would not put in front of a room of important customers. Oh, we all know who that guy is. So employer needs, and again, I think for many of us who came up through traditional residential colleges that have a very strong coming-of-age orientation and a strong liberal arts background, the fixation on jobs can sometimes feel a little suffocating, but there is clearly a mismatch, as I touched upon already, and we need to map better. And right now, in this economy, where graduates are taking on unprecedented amounts of debt, they have to think hard about jobs. It's interesting to me that 5 years ago, even on our traditional campus, we rarely heard people ask about what do your graduates do afterwards. They sort of gave us the benefit of the doubt. Not post-2009, not with all the articles that people are seeing about college graduates, either malemployed or underemployed. So this is an important piece. Student needs. I'm not convinced that traditional higher ed is very much built first around students. And we've seen this in everything from the hours we keep to the way we think about, this phrase you can't use on your main campus, customer service. We use it in our online division. We don't use it on our main campus, different cultures. To how we think about the needs and demands of working adults. And when we think about CBE, we're mostly talking about working adults. Interestingly, if the average age of our students in online is about 30, the average age of our students in College for America is closer to 40. Chris Clerkin, who directs the program, right? And still about 40? Yeah. So, we think about what those people need who are juggling family and work and trying to fit in an education, and life is telling them that they need to get a degree. At a time when 70% of all new jobs require a 2-year degree or its equivalent. This is pretty powerful stuff. And in rethinking what we do, it's allowed us to build very precisely to the needs of those adults. But I'll move faster, you know these things. So this is a sort of comparison. The top one I've touched on, it's the most critical one. It reminded me, we were a little bit inspired in the exercise originally by an interview with Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank. You know of him, I'm sure. And they asked him in an interview in 60 Minutes, how do you think about this? He said, oh, I made a list of everything that traditional banks do, and then I tried to do the opposite. They lend to men, I'll lend to women. They make you come to the bank, I'll go to the village. They only want to do big loans, I'll do little loans. They require collateral, I won't require any. So we started playing with this notion of what happens if you can, flip that time and learning variable, right? So in our model, learning is absolutely fixed and non-negotiable, and time becomes the flexible piece. So everyone loves the story of people going fast, and some people don't. Some people are using it as kind of a straw man, I think, to attack competency-based education, like that's the core of it. That's a byproduct. That's a byproduct of really talented, driven students who know things, intersecting with a curriculum that provides the right environment for them. But I think so our first graduate, Zach Sherman, went from 0 credits to an associate's degree in under 100 days. And he did it for $1,250, right? So that's the policymakers glom onto this. But in reality, the story I tell more often now are about the students who take 2 years to master a writing competency, because we won't let you graduate with this degree if you can't write yet. How many of our schools can say that today with that level of integrity? Knowing that there's a lot of scrutiny of this model, we feel pretty rigid about that kind of discipline. So we have critics who say to us, we have no grades. So you either have mastered a competency or not yet. Those are the two states. Interestingly, by the way, adults who have come back after 20 and 30 years away from school, who in many cases have had mixed histories in academic, tell us that they love the fact that the opposite of success is not failure. It's just not yet. It honors the notion that hard things take time, and there's no penalty for resubmitting your projects and your assessments. Think about how we penalize people for doing that in a traditional classroom structure, where with every failed submission, your sort of grade point comes down, right? Your grade comes down. So, I think this is a really powerful piece. The rest of this, I think, is fairly straightforward. I'm going to talk about academic support and what that looks like, because that's another piece that people really sort of hone in on. How does that happen? We love the fact that we can think about competencies in smaller grain units than the 3-credit course. It's really great to put somebody who's frightened to death of writing their first paper in a smaller piece of writing that doesn't look like the prospect of a 15-week freshman comp course with X number of essays outlined for them. No, you have a project. You have this bit of discrete writing. There's a rubric. We'll work with you to get that right, and we'll scaffold upon that as you move through the curriculum. Competencies. So think of them for us as can-do statements. Measurable, demonstrable. This is stuff we claim for our students. Sometimes critics will tell us or claim that competency-based education is inherently vocational. And I think what they mean here, so great, you can talk about things like basic skills, math, and writing, but what about critical thinking? What about soft skills that employers tell us are so important? The ability to work in teams, to give instruction. We would argue that there's nothing about the liberal arts that doesn't lend itself to competency-based education. In fact, we would argue that if you can't rightly make claims for what students learn, actually we'd argue that traditional or incumbent higher ed has the bigger problem here. Now look no one's going to prove or disprove the existence of God in our CBE program, right? Not happening. But we can talk about ways of thinking critically that happen in a philosophy class. Right? And we can cover important material that you would include in a philosophy class on the way to get into competencies. So you can see the sorts of things we talk about here. But I love this. I just discovered it this morning. This is one of our graduates who was blogging. But read the passage. I hate when people read slides too. So you read the passage and tell me if this doesn't sound like a great college degree experience. There's nothing vocational about that, though she certainly learned business skills, and she's certainly clearly honed her writing. But think about the way she talks about her experience and the kinds of things in which she engaged. And I think it's really powerful stuff. And it gives light to this notion that a CBE degree experience has to necessarily be lesser. It's not. Now, it is different. And I think one of the things we often do is we get into the kind of confusion, and I think maybe John Ebersol talked about this morning, about there are many kinds of higher education. We're not seeking to replace traditional coming-of-age education for 18-year-olds in our model. That requires a certain kind of intentional learning community where you get to have leadership opportunities and teams, and you get to live in the dorm, you get to make mistakes, you get to do all sorts of things, you study abroad, and all of that, outside the academic experience, builds to a kind of coming-of-age experience that is highly valued, hard to replace with technology, so it's not going away, we're not going to technologize it. I think that we will see an unbundling in the future, where we see students who have coming-of-age living residential experiences, and they will get their academic experience in a variety of ways. Because those are the two things that 18-year-olds buy from us, or their parents buy from us. If you go on most campus tours, you won't hear, I would argue, a lot of questions about academics, not because they don't care, they actually give us the benefit of the doubt. They believe in us. They look around, they say, this is college. Got that part. Now, wait a minute. Do you have a JV field hockey team? Because I don't think I can make your varsity. And where will I live? And will I look like that tour guide? Because they look like a tool, and I don't want to be like that. But I love that tour guide over there. This is my daughter, by the way. I'm just quoting my daughter, who once said that after a 4-hour drive to a New York school. She said, we should turn around now. We hadn't got out of the car. I said, why? She goes, everyone looks like a tool. But I think, so when you think about those two things, our students in CFA, they've had all the coming of age they can handle. They're making minimum wage. They're having non-family sustaining jobs. We targeted people in large organizations who are at the bottom 10% of the organizational chart. Now, in reality, they've come to us across the board, but our intent, our strategy, was to make this price for people who aren't even attending community colleges in many instances, because the way their life is structured, or the way they like to learn is the other possibility. So, we think of this I think it's really important that we talk about which higher ed we have in mind when we make big general statements around policy especially. Because the needs of 18-year-olds are different than the needs of 40-year-olds who are stuck in their jobs and who want a better life for their families. So the program, this is the associate's degree program. As I mentioned, it's 120 competencies. They're in these clusters. The structure of the program was inspired and shaped in some part by the degree qualifications profile. You heard from Carol earlier, and especially now with the bachelor's degree. So just so you know, associate's degree was approved by NEASC in fall of 12. It's approved by the Department of Ed under direct assessment in April of 13. We ran the program in a pilot for that spring, learned a whole lot, hit the pause button for the summer, got it right, and did the official launch a year ago in October. So we have 1 year under our belt with this with the associates program, and currently has about 1,000 students. So the uptake is about 120 students per month over the last 6 months, though last month it was 240. So it feels like we're getting traction. We work with very large employers. So you see foundation skills, which we've talked about. Interestingly, employers talk to us almost as much about the soft skills, personal skills. And they especially prize the teamwork. So typically in the associate's degree program, students are working in at least 5 substantial team-based projects with a lot of assessment about how they do in that context and how they're working together. And then, of course, the closest thing we come to a major is on the bottom. So when we go to the bachelor's degree, 240 credits, more clusters obviously. It's scaffolded, so those students who finish the associate's degree move into the bachelor's degree. So the bachelor's was approved by NEASC about a month ago. Barbara Birmingham is here. So just approved, and has been in the market for about 2 weeks, and has already, Chris, how many students? 100 students? So again, a lot of interest in that 4-year degree pathway. And here the majors are communication studies, business, or healthcare. We work with employers like Partners Healthcare here in Massachusetts, the single largest employer in the state. Penn Medical, the medical system attached to University of Pennsylvania, and others. And what we know is that 70%, I'm going to give you an example, 70% of your interactions with the healthcare system will be with non-clinical workers who in many cases are making hourly wages. It's where hospitals have their highest turnover rates and their lowest patient satisfaction rates. And ACA is requiring them to do considerable upskilling. So we've actually, the Clinton Global Initiative did a convening around some of the labor research we did that informed the design of the program. Let me say a word about that. So we certainly work with employers and get their feedback, and I think we all probably have had the experience of bringing in employer advisory groups. But what we find is that much more powerful than that are some of the labor market research tools we use, and we brought in the Workforce Strategy Center. We acquired a small workforce research group out of Providence who have joined us. And you know, when I talk about looking at labor department data, for example, they kind of roll their eyes and say, "Great, why don't you put another record on the turntable too?" They use modern tools. They're looking at massive databases like LinkedIn. They're using Burning Glass. They're looking at Monster, and they're doing real-time labor analysis. And one of the things we would observe, I think, is that oftentimes employers themselves don't know what these jobs need to look like or what these competencies have to be. The world is changing around them. They've cut back on their HR departments. They don't rewrite their job positions. There's almost a kind of different kind of conversation in which they're saying back to us, what should this job look like 5 years from now? It's an interesting, different conversation than I think sometimes we are accustomed to. So let me move on. We've built a platform for the delivery of the program, and some of you may know that we've separated this out. We've spun this out as a new separate entity to market this, but it's built on the Salesforce platform. And I think what's the point I would make here, really, because I'm careful not to pitch this thing, is that I think learning management systems, the traditional incumbent ones, were built on a paradigm of the classroom, trying to recreate the virtual classroom, and they're very much focused around traditional pedagogical notions, and they're built really in many ways around supporting the teacher, the faculty member, as he or she works with his or her students in this virtual classroom. I think this next generation is really going to be a student-centered management system that is much stronger on data analytics, and really we think of it as relationship management. Because the core of our program, and we really, we do this in our online program, and I would say it's the sort of secret sauce in many ways here as well, is the quality and strength of our proactive advising. So every student in the program gets a coach. And again, as you heard, other models use this too, so it's not unique to us. But I think the way we use data analytics to give us optics into how students are engaging with us, how they're engaging with the material, how they're engaging with each other, and how that shapes the kind of proactive interaction from their coaches is really critically important. Our issue for students is mostly not an academic one. The issue is not whether they're smart enough. It's really the psycho-emotional challenge of going back when you already have so little buffer in your life and you're juggling jobs and kids' practices and maybe a second part-time job and all of the things that life throws at people, particularly people who don't have a lot of resources. And it's pretty amazing if you listen in on the calls how much of the time is spent on either reassuring or cajoling or reminding and doing that kind of work, and it's transformational for students. And once they get their feet under them, once they get the right pace, once they start to build confidence, pretty amazing things can happen. I want to talk about this one because I think it comes up a lot, and it came up in the Inspector General's report, where there was a concern raised by the Inspector General that coaches, what we might call advisors, we call them coaches, were the sort of bulk of the interaction with students, which is not accurate, and they're not meant to be a sort of poor class of faculty. What we think instead here is that about how we've unbundled the functions of faculty, and we think about different people playing different parts of that traditional vertically integrated role. So when we think about innovation generally, I think unbundling is one of those things you have to always think about, right? Which is not how do I take the pieces as I know them today, but how do I think about the functions and see how I can pull those apart and recombine them in ways that work better for students, that give me better outcomes. And in our case too, we also wanted to drive costs down given who we were trying to serve. So if you think about the things that faculty do, different people on our team will provide that. And some of the richest, interestingly, richest interactions and the most traditional interactions are the ones with faculty reviewers who are giving feedback to students on their projects. So remember I said mastery or not yet. They all work with rubrics. We train them in the use of rubrics. They're qualified in their field. And when they give back that feedback that says, on these 8 items on the rubric, we have check marks and 2 not yet. But let me tell you what's going on here. Here's some links to some learning content we think will be really helpful. Here's what I think you're doing and how you might want to think about it. And we see these rich interactions. And we ask our reviewers to turn assessments around in 48 hours. They actually average about 30. So again, students love having that pretty immediate feedback while the thinking is still fresh and they respond to it very quickly. And that's a very rich way of them getting the kind of support and learning support they need. They get it in lots of other ways as well. So some of it will be in the richness of the learning content that we've put together. Peer-to-peer learning, which is very powerful. One of the reasons we work with employers is they create natural affinity groups. So we've seen this with call centers, for example, where we've had great success. And people in call centers, getting together at lunch and saying, what are you working on? And one of the things students told us they wanted to know is who else at my company is enrolled? Like, I want to know who my peers are. And they find each other. So I remember Undersecretary Cantor coming to visit Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield and meeting with a group of our students. And this was the part that she was sort of most skeptical of, I think, or she wanted reassurance at least. And she asked them, and she said, wouldn't you like to have faculty when you're struggling with something? And they said, yes, of course, because if I put the question that way. But then I said, so have you found ways to successfully engage to get what you need when you're struggling? And said, oh, yeah. And then they start to describe the way that they rely on each other, how they turn to their coach directed them to this resource, how they submitted something. So in reality, there was a rich array, and it seems to be working pretty well. But I think this is one of the things that I think is problematic is I'm not sure that we always are as forthright with faculty who fear being displaced in these new models, because they are being displaced in these new models if you think about traditional roles. And we should just say that, right? So in our instance, our traditional campus, which has about 4,000 students on it, 3,000 undergrads, we actually are adding more traditional faculty, and we're actually proposing tenure, which I know sounds a little counterintuitive. But we're actually being more traditional in that world, because 18-year-olds need the presence of full-time adults who are their mentors and their role models and engage them in getting those internships, et cetera. We have different kinds of faculty roles in online. We have full-time faculty who don't do any course prep. That's done in a decoupled curriculum model, and their real work is on student engagement and assessment, right? And in College for America, we have unbundled the role even further. And I think the point I would make is that, again, it's that danger of making big sweeping statements, all faculty are going to be displaced. No, but on traditional campuses, there's a good argument, they've been displaced by adjuncts and other things before CBE came along, but there's a good argument for their role in a traditional role. In research universities, there's a good argument for their role. In online programs, different kinds of needs. And then in CBE, different kinds of needs again. And maybe new models of what faculty roles can look like. And we're seeing that emerge for us. Early results. Independent study. Chris is blanching a little bit because I'm not supposed to be sharing this quite yet. Won't say who commissioned it, but this is a third party who came in and feeling really good about it. My worry is that if we're going to have a great deal of integrity around competencies and how we know, we may see completion rates go down, right? There's no passing through. There's a lot of passing through in higher ed. There's no passing through in this program. So one of the things we're really concerned about, and we're watching very closely, is who's being successful. Who can we, we're early, right? So we've got a research team, independent research team, that's spending a lot of time looking at our students and trying to understand who's most successful, who struggles, why, what can we discern from that, and how can we steer students to this program when it makes sense for them, and maybe away from it when it doesn't. But generally speaking, persistence rates have been very high, higher than we predicted, and a great deal of, as you can see, happiness with the program. Some big questions, and these I'm probably going to go through this very, very quickly because these were well described this morning. But if this is a movement, if this next phase of competency-based is a movement, it's still very early, and it still has all of the ills of new movements. I don't know if movement's the right word, but certainly this new sort of direction, right? So there's no agreed-upon taxonomy of programs. There's no agreed-upon nomenclature. People use proficiency, mastery, outcomes, competencies. We don't have an agreed-upon terminology to use. If competencies are a new alternative currency in higher ed, we don't have an agreed upon rate of exchange. How is my competency in writing compared to your competency in writing compared to that person's competency in writing? And this is some of the work that CBEN's doing, and others are trying to figure this out. And it's a little bit, also what happens in movements is you get a lot of opportunity and a lot of vying for territory. So I think sometimes this can feel a bit like Game of Thrones with slightly less sex and violence, but there's a lot of positioning around CBEN right now, around CBE right now. As people, if you're the standard setter, you get to sort of own the field, or at least in some ways. So a lot of good work being done by a lot of organizations and a lot of people, and it's very typical of where this kind of work would be at this stage. Assessment, as we know, remains contested territory. So I think this is, excuse me, the good news is that there's a real commitment to assessment, but we could have lots and lots of debates about what kinds of assessments for what kinds of competencies under what kinds of conditions, et cetera. Title IV is still a bear. It's still mapped to the credit hour. So you have this fundamental gap between the legislative language of direct assessment, which says we will allow for alternatives to the credit hour for the purposes of dispersing financial aid. And then all of the rules are about the credit hour. Complete mismatch. So we went through this kind of torturous process with a department team that was great. So I know we give the department a hard time sometimes, and it's frustrating. You heard some of that this morning. There was actually a real desire to figure out how to make this work. And I'm really excited about the experimental sites that have been approved. So there are 4 themes within the experimental sites. As you know, this is authority that the department has, doesn't require any legislative action, and they can waive some of those onerous rules that are still tied to the credit hour. So there are 3 of them that are related to competency-based education, 3 of the 4 themes, one on PLA, one on hybrids, so the idea of mixing competency-based and course-based, right? So imagine models, and I think we will get there at some point in the future, where students might do competency-based for some good part of what they're doing in their education, but switching into a class when they feel the need for whatever reason to do that. And then straight direct assessment. So I think I'm not sure if David Sue's here and how many submissions they have. We have one in. I know lots of people have submissions into the department, so I think people are eager. The question will be, will the department's career staff push this out far enough to welcome genuine innovation? If it's a half measure, Peter's chuckling, if it's a half measure, not so helpful, right? But this is an onerous piece. OIG's letter, one question was, would it have a chilling effect? And I don't know. Ted Mitchell would say no. The department had seen it weeks in advance. It wasn't a surprise to them. Do you all know what I'm talking about? The OIG, the Office of the Inspector General, did a letter on competency-based to the department that called them to account for some key areas. So among them was, is there genuine and substantial interaction with faculty? And they keep raising, or is this closer to a correspondence program, which is like, are we solving the problems of 1880? Is anyone doing correspondence anymore? But anyway, but I think it seems to have gotten very little reaction. And part of the OIG's power and authority comes from the way they report to the oversight committees. And as Amy said this morning, someone said this morning, this is the rare initiative in Washington that actually has bipartisan support. So there's a lot of back and forth. And then we're still learning who can be successful. And that's really, I think, a critical piece. It's still very early on, and we'll learn a lot more as we go. So I think that's encouraging factors. This last slide, sorry. Lots of programs in the pipeline. You heard over 300 today. The last number I heard was 225 and counting. The fact that somebody like Michigan would get into the game, the fact that Purdue has announced, Mitch Daniels has announced they're going to do something, like MOOCs validated online learning for many, this is going to further validate competency-based education. I mentioned bipartisan support. Employers get this. Someone asked this morning about, do you have to struggle so students can sort of represent what they do? So anyone who's doing this today still has to, be able to provide a traditional looking transcript. So we do a competency-based transcript, and we do a transcript that's mapped to course outcomes and looks like a traditional transcript. But the reality is employers love this. They talk competencies. They talk about what people know how to do or aren't good at doing. We're the ones that sort of struggle as an industry, but employers get this immediately. And then early results have been encouraging. I shared those with you. And then you look at a day like today. There's just so much interest. It's different than online learning when distance education first came on board. And I think part of what's going on right now, part of the weariness in Washington is that in the mid-90s, if you remember the demonstration project on the 50% rule, that was kind of the break, right? So they said, okay, we're going to waive that in the demonstration project and you can do entirely online programs. And most of not-for-profit higher ed looked down its nose at online learning, and the for-profits rushed into the space. And they did it with great success and huge numbers, and in some instances a fair bit of abuse that's still with us, kind of playing through the news. I think part of what's going on, my own view, never anybody in the department has said this to me, is I think the department lives in fear of that happening again with competency-based education. And what's different about it this time is that so many not-for-profits are moving into this space and embracing it, or at least trying to understand it and working on their own versions. And what's great right now is that there's so many varieties. I think Pam may or may not have mentioned, but as they do case studies, part of what's being revealed is that the institutions are really quite varied in how they're thinking about this, how they're applying it. And that's a good place to be right now. We have a lot to learn, and the more attempts, the more sort of flowers that bloom, the better we'll all be for the lessons we can share and learn from each other. So,
Paul,
sorry,
thank you
that's a
very
mouthful.
much. You have passed the competency for keynoting.
Thank you.
This is going to be the last time we're all together in plenary fashion, so I want to encourage people to come up, and if you have any questions, or at this point we'll also encourage short statements of fact or opinion joining the discussion. I'll start off, Paul, by asking, you mentioned the possibility of a hybrid model, and we know with online learning, a number of institutions were able to dip their toes into online without fully committing by getting into it somewhat with a hybrid program, either on a course basis or a programmatic basis. From your perspective, is that really possible with CBE, or does there need to be a much more major institutional commitment to launch something like this?
So you've got a technical issue right now where Title IV rules won't allow you to do a hybrid. And the experimental sites is opening up that possibility, which I mentioned. It's very, very hard under the current rules to think through how you can systematically allow people to weave in and out. So it's easier if you think about, we'll do competency first over this period of time and do a block, and then they'll move into courses. But it will be artful when we can allow students to move in and out seamlessly, right? It may be a while before we figure that out. But we don't have that in place, and you don't have systems. Your student information and financial aid systems never have been designed for this kind of disbursement of aid. So we're moving towards Region 8, which seems best suited to non-traditional term structures. If you're going to stay tied to the credit hour and the course as your base unit, even though you're doing competencies, I would argue that's mostly a form of accelerated learning, which is a good thing. That's not a criticism, but that's what it is. It's very hard under, this is probably way too out of the weeds, satisfactory academic progress rules to go much beyond the 14 weeks. That's kind of the problem. They'll let you stretch a little bit, but not infinitely. So it's great for accelerated. It's not great if somebody needs a year or 2 years to master a competency. So you got some structural pieces, you got some system pieces that are not in place yet. But I do think that we're going to see hybrid programs because I think students are going to demand it when we're, through a combination of policy change and system change, able to accommodate that need.
Great. Please come to the microphone if you can.
Hi, Kathleen Kirby. Thank you, Paul. That was really interesting. I have 2 questions for you. One is, do your competencies transfer to other colleges or universities? Does the degree transfer, the associate's degree, transfer toward a baccalaureate program? And then my other question has to do with, it sounds like you're working specifically with employers to identify students who could benefit from these programs. And I wondered if you had thought at all about the prison population.
Yeah, so on the transfer credit question, we don't yet have, right, we're a year in, so we don't have a lot of graduates. We've had no instances of students not having their credits accepted. Remember, they get a traditional transcript. So our registrar looking at that, it looks pretty traditional. And in fact, I would argue, you should want these graduates, right? These are the ones who actually can write. They're the ones who actually can do what we say they do. So their completion rates are going to be great. Transfer credit acceptance is always the prerogative of the accepting institution. It's easy to imagine someone saying, no, I'm not doing competency-based. We haven't seen it yet. And with this proliferation of programs, I think we are less likely to see it. Remember, there's a lot of really good large-scale competency-based programs out there already. So it's also not like the first time they've seen this. Whether you're talking about Excelsior or Charter Oaks or Western Governors, I mean, so it's not entirely new. We have talked about the prison population, and we've had some conversations with folks who work with that population. There are challenges, and some of those challenges have to do with the fact that our program's online. Access to online can be problematic with rules about what's possible, what's not possible. But that would be, I mean, it's very much in our mission as this program seeks to serve people who, for whatever reasons, have been marginalized by the existing system, are not well served by it.
Paul, you mentioned the soft skills, and when you talk to people in the business community, they're saying that schools are often graduating people who are operationally sound, but they're not able to identify problems, they're not able to think strategically, the critical thinking skills. And I notice your associate program has those competencies built in, but is the instructional model capable? You mentioned that you have people working in teams, but can you really get to those soft skills in this model without the peer-to-peer interaction, without the faculty-to-student challenge that you have more in the traditional class, whether it's on ground or online?
So the short answer is yes. I think we've learned how to do that in online learning generally. I think those lessons have been well applied in online delivery of competency-based programs. There's substantial teamwork and critical thinking, and these soft skills are well represented here. And what's different about them is in traditional institutions, they're largely left out of the learning outcomes of the curriculum, and often, I'm going to overgeneralize, but often assumed to happen in all of the extracurricular things that I mentioned in passing about coming of age, right? So you're going to learn leadership when you play on a team or volunteer in a student organization. You're going to be an RD, and you're going to learn some other skills about negotiating difficult situations. We sort of assume that, but we're often, if you look at most institutions, not very clear about the claims we make for those soft skills, and rarely do we measure. I would argue that, and I've written about this in terms of civic engagement, I think competency-based education has important implications for civic engagement because that is another squishy area in higher ed where we say we do it and we educate citizens, and we rarely have explicit claims or assessments for if that's really happening. So yes, and I think we've learned so much about online pedagogy that we know how to construct learning situations in that environment that go right to the kinds of interactions you suggest. I would also suggest something else. We often hold these new programs, which will get better, right? CB programs are not as good as they will get. That's the nature of innovation. But we often hold them to a standard of quality that I would argue, frequently don't meet in our own traditional institutions. So I don't know how much teamwork and leadership development happens in lecture halls of 500. And I don't know that I don't know that I would look to, so if you're looking at Wesleyan and you have small classrooms and seminars, that kind of very traditional, which is not most of higher ed, probably happening more fully and as a function of size. But if you look at a lot of higher education today, I wonder how much of that's actually happening there as well. Employers would tell you, not much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Sir, please identify yourself.
Taking off from the last point that you just made.
Could you tell us who you are, please?
James Kennedy from the University of Maryland, University College.
Thank you.
Taking off from the last point you just made, how about emotional intelligence? I realize, again, it's other than drinking and fraternities and sororities and whatnot, there's not a lot of that at main traditional campuses as well, but what can CBE-based programs do to develop that, particularly when it's just the student and the computer on their own?
But it's rarely the student and the computer on their own, right? So a lot of what we build into this, of course, is not only the engagement of their coach, and that's a very frequent kind of interaction in partnership, really, but it's also a lot of peer engagement, a lot of learning community engagement, a lot of workplace engagement. Team assignments are required to work with others. So I would argue that it's actually really quite rich in those things. And it's interesting, so the one that our students, I hope I'm still right on this, Chris is here and she can say like stop, but I think the one our students frequently resist the most is teamwork, the team assignments. they often are in jobs where they don't work in teams. If you're on an assembly line and you're doing this all day long, whatever that is, you're not really thinking about teams in the way that we tend to think about team skills in a sophisticated workplace. And even if they're driven students, they get frustrated that, well, just let me do the thing. I don't want to have to negotiate. By the way, this happens with undergrads as well, right? Really good students don't want to have to be held back by others and scheduling and all the frustrations. But it's actually one of the most transformative ones. Again, we have a small pool, so we have an N of X out there in the workplace. But when we listen to what our graduates are saying about how things change for them at work, particularly in terms of how their supervisors assess their skills, it's really quite powerful.
So Paul, with online learning, we've seen that the faculty role has shifted somewhat, and if you go to higheredjobs.com, one of the most prevalent positions that you're seeing right now is instructional designers, which says to me that the industry has matured. More and more colleges have adopted this. It's kind of, if you're not online at this point, you're a little bit out of the game. For competency-based education, are there new positions, new skill sets that you see in building a team that are different than online, different than traditional higher education?
So I think what we would call a traditional online, that's that group of about 55,000 students and 1,100 employees. I think there's a lot of movement already in that world towards some of the kinds of new positions you're talking about. So assessment experts. I mean, we're hiring a lot more people who are just quite expert in assessment in a way that we never kind of did in the traditional institution. That was just something that was left to the individual faculty member to work out on a course-by-course basis for the most part. And, you know, the accreditors have forever been hammering on us to be better about our outcomes and how we know. And you know, I sat on the commission for 6 years some time ago, but, you know, for a while people always want to sit that one out and think, it's just a fad, it'll go away. Well, it's not going away, and we're all sort of being forced to think about it more than we have in the past, more emphatically. But I think, I think positions are changing. So I mentioned in passing our online faculty who are full-time, distributed around the country, have no expectations around scholarship. It's not what we hire them to do. Don't serve on committees, some advisory work internally, but it's not that kind of job. And they don't have a lot of class prep. They're not spending hours and hours getting ready for the next class. They've been trained in the course that they're teaching. And they really live to engage with students, particularly when they start to struggle with the material and they do assessments. For some of our colleagues, that sounds like hell, right? Because if you signed on to a faculty life that includes lots of rich scholarship and opportunity and all of those things, this doesn't sound very good. For these faculty who are really passionate, and we've gotten really good at screening them, passionate about their work with students, it's great. And you can be in Key West with your toes in the sand, online in January, engaging with your students, and it's really interesting to see how rich those engagements are.
So I think we need to wrap up pretty soon. I want to ask you, since you're a bit of a futurist, to look into the crystal ball. I think at one time we had a discussion about online, and I think maybe a few years back you thought it might be the end of traditional universities. I'm not sure you ever said that.
No, I don't think I said that.
Okay. I'm glad I didn't misquote you on that.
Peter Smith said to me, if you're going to get run out of town, get in the front and make it look like a parade. That would happen if I sort of
But however, I think we've seen with online that online in many ways has given new life by opening up markets, has rejuvenated institutions, rather than has actually led to their demise. What do you think about CBE as you're looking forward? Is this something that's going to be disruptive to the point of challenging traditional institutions, or will it be an adaptation that you see more 5 years from now?
So so crystal balls are notoriously faulty, right? So I don't take this as offered with a great deal of humility here, but I do think that you could argue that in some ways we have been for hundreds of years engaged in a faith-based initiative, and the faith we had was that if you had enough PhDs on your faculty and enough volumes in your library and enough students with high SAT scores, then good things would happen on the other end. There was an input-based notion. And I think what CB brings to the industry is an output-based notion, right? Which says this, most simply, if you are crystal clear about the claims you make for learning and how you get there, how you know. And I know the how you know question is a complicated one. But if you are really put a great deal of rigor around those two things, no one ought to care how you get people there. Right? Think about that. No one should care about the inputs if these two things are working really well. Now, it's not the ends always justify the means, but you know what I'm saying, right? So all of a sudden now you have a movement with higher ed that says we're actually going to really get focused on the outcomes and what students know and how we know they know those things. And then we can have debates about whether we've chose the right things and it's the right competencies and how we transfer them, but that's the journey. So here's what I think will happen. I think traditional higher ed is not going to go away, but I think traditional higher ed is going to have to lift its game. Because it's going to be held up against a standard that says, why can these guys do this, but you can't? And we're going to see, I think, a lot of pressure on institutions to do that. The second thing I would say is I think we're going to see unbundling more vigorously. So in higher ed, we've always unbundled. So we unbundle our food service and get somebody else to do it. We unbundle our maintenance and get somebody else to do it. We unbundle our advertising and get somebody else to do the creative. But we've never unbundled the core teaching and learning enterprise. That's being unbundled today. You've got lots of ed tech providers who want to come in and take a piece for you. We'll do this for you. You have academic partners and Dell Tech and others who will come in and take a big chunk for you. And they overlap now increasingly. Pearson is one accreditation away from being almost a full university if it wanted to be. Right? So that unbundling, I think, is going to get more extreme. And it's both very threatening, but it's also an opportunity to rethink your business models. And business models are deeply broken.
Let's let this gentleman have the last word here, or the
No,
last
so
question.
it's maybe a riff on the vision and pushing a little further. I'm Bob Fogel, I'm CEO of a company called Six Red Marbles, and I just moderated a session in Singapore on ed tech and ed innovation, and the conversation was completely different. And so I just love to ask the question, what I saw there was where we in the United States are worried about jobs, worried about the future, we may have a lack of jobs, and we worry about accreditation, government policy, blah, 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 traditions of universities. They're focused on the ubiquitousness of low-cost, commoditized, high-quality content. Their only matter is getting people certified and qualified as fast as possible because their economies are booming rapidly. So I'd just like to hear you. So I think, if we were looking for an export business for the United States, this is it. And I just wonder what, your thoughts are on international expansion of this model, because there's a desperate need outside the country for a much more rapid approach to getting people qualified, certified, and quote-unquote educated to serve the needs for their economies to grow.
So my experience in what you've described is that outside the U.S., there is much less acceptance of these models, and that, I'm making big broad generalizations here, but that these models, that they're much more tradition-bound, brand-bound, hierarchically bound than the U.S., which I think innovates much more vigorously around that. Now, what I will say, in greater harmony with what you just said, is that they see enormous challenges that they can't meet by building more bricks-and-mortar campuses. So if those external challenges may get them to move, but if you take a look at the fixation with the world's 100 greatest universities that you'll find throughout the Middle East, throughout China, I actually think that they're going to be slower to get here. I think U.S. higher education will once again lead the way on this. If we do, that will move them along, because I think they still look to the U.S. for their models. And now that you have high brand players in the space, that's going to help. So the fact that Harvard and MIT and Stanford were willing to do MOOCs, validated online learning, the fact that the Michigans and Purdue's of the world are doing this is going to help at CB. But I'm actually a little more skeptical. I mean, I think they talk a good game because they know what the pressure of the problem is, but I don't see them moving in this direction. If they did, CBE would work really well for them. Because a lot of what they're talking about are for people who don't need degrees, but they need key competencies in key areas and industries.
Paul, thanks so much for being
pleasure.
our keynote
Thank you.
today. Thanks to the audience.
Thank you.